Hello, everybody, and welcome back for this third session on the Affirming Action Symposium. I am Raquel Garín, and together with Hipólita Barnato and, of course, Professor Paolo Tombesi, we will be moderating this conversation between two architects. On one side, we have Hannah Robertson from Australia, and then we have Xu Tiantian from China.
As in the previous sessions, we will give you a short introduction about our participants to this debate. Hannah Robertson is an Australian architectural designer and educator. Her research interests include remote area building, participatory design, and transdisciplinary teaching. Hannah's unusual architectural career combines a socially driven and contextually responsive design and construction approach with policymaking in working with remote communities. Her work seeks to demonstrate how territorial and typology-based approach to building can contribute to the development of the local industry and to the fulfillment of the contextual needs of the local communities.
Yeah.
So good morning, everyone, and good evening from Australia, where I'm talking to you from today. Thanks to Paolo for the invitation to speak. It's a real privilege and an honour to be able to present alongside Xu Tiantian and to join the conversation with the other speakers today who I really admire the work of. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which I'm located, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'm located on the Mary Creek in Melbourne, Australia. I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging and extend gratitude for the opportunity to present to you on these lands today. I also acknowledge the Bindewara, Yolngu and Olkula peoples who are the co-creators and co-authors to this work. This work is conducted on their traditional lands. The emergent research contribution from this work would not have been possible without their generosity in sharing country, stories, knowledge and friendship through these projects. The concerns sort of informing my work, there are 4 key pillars and they all interact with each other, but these are contextual responsivity, participation, partnerships and adaptability. And underpinning these 4 pillars is this notion of a shared vision. Because all of my work involves partnerships with community, uniting behind a shared vision is really critical and to driving the work forward. And I'll come back to how this talks about how these interact throughout the projects that I do. So my work has emerged in response to the problem of building in remote regions. Building in remote regions can be described using historian Geoffrey Blaney's catch cry of a tyranny of distance. Physical distance, inaccessibility, limited available local resources, small populations, and a corresponding lack of agency contribute to increasing building costs in remote areas, which can make it difficult to meet needs. In remote Australia, a compound problem exists. The majority of recognised Indigenous land is located in remote regions of Australia. For the most remote and smallest Indigenous settlements, known as homelands, which typically consist of family groups located on their traditional lands and have populations of only up to about 200 people, the challenge is most severe. Since the inception of the homelands and land rights movement in the 1970s, when Indigenous peoples reclaimed their lands, government support for even the most basic services of water, power, let alone housing, education or other facilities, has been ad hoc at best. For the last 20 years, there has been a more active position that there is to be no government support for new housing on homelands and limited support for other building typologies and services. The Indigenous land is held on collective inalienable title, which also makes it nearly impossible to access finance because there is no ability to buy or sell the land. Despite this, homelands enable connections to country and therefore culture. There are also emergent livelihood opportunities with the carbon economy, land management, social enterprises and cultural tourism that can be supported on country. My work and my interest deals with this country. Since my interest in Understanding Remote Indigenous Australia began in 2009 through a volunteer placement over a uni semester break at an Indigenous-run NGO called Cape York Partnership in Queensland, Australia. It has evolved in scale, setting, and type. Initially, the focus was on building. My Masters of Architecture thesis, Bush Owner Builder, was run in collaboration with Cape York Partnerships and drew on particular participatory design and self-build strategies to build houses on homelands surrounding the Indigenous community of Hopevale in Cape York, Queensland. To lower costs and ensure a sustainable and local system was used in the structure was built primarily from timber that was milled from the site. After this, I continued to work at Cape York Institute on policy projects, and I was exposed to the systemic issues that restrict the ability to build on homelands. This led to an interest in the regional scale. I undertook independent consulting work such as the Literary Yolngu Cultural Tourism Master Plan, which involved extensive participatory collaboration with traditional owners across 6 homelands in the extremely remote and largely Indigenous region of Northeast Arnhem Land in Australia's Northern Territory. At the same time, I also started a PhD. My PhD was a by-design study that focused on developing an alternative building strategy in Northeast Arnhem Land. I analysed the amount of money coming into the region for building and how and where that money was being spent. I found that the money was being spent on employing people and material systems that were important to the region, and that building was only happening in the largest town, Nhulunbuy, and Indigenous community, Yirrkala. What was being overlooked was the smallest and most remote 32 homeland settlements, which are dispersed across the region and are made up of family groups living on their traditional lands. Despite overcrowding and poor conditions, there had been little to no funding for new building in these communities since the late 1990s. What was revelatory, though, is that despite the prevalence of the imported systems, there was an abundance of local material resources, timber, sand, stone, and local Yolngu people that could be involved in construction. And that on the homelands in particular, if there was just one building typology other than a house, like a school, a shop, or a community facility, that homeland was 50% more likely to have an enterprise operating on it. From this, I put forward the idea of a catalysing infrastructure on homelands that involves local people, local materials, and which brings together multiple non-housing functions in the one very small building. After finishing the PhD, I have worked in collaboration with the Olkula people in Queensland, Australia, and the Centre for Appropriate Technology to achieve their vision of a cultural knowledge centre on their homelands. When Olkula and I met, they had already articulated the vision for a catalysing infrastructure on their country, so we were united behind a shared vision from the beginning. The Cultural Centre will be a place to conduct cultural tours, keep and show cultural archives, undertake land management research and activities, and provide a place for rangers to live on country. Over the last 2.5 years, we have developed our collaboration step by step. Over 3 successive semesters, the Olkula traditional owners and over 300 Master of Architecture and final year Bachelor of Engineering students have worked together to contribute to the master plans, detailed designs, engineering proposals, and town planning reports. We've also built upon participatory design processes, appropriate technology, and self-building theories. The Cultural Knowledge Centre is built from sustainable local material systems, rammed earth and locally milled timber. Although there is no historic tradition of building with rammed earth in Cape York, the Olkula traditional owners were drawn to the system because it symbolises building on country with country and is something that can be distinct about Olkula country as it is replicated in future building. In 2020, in spite of the pandemic, we moved forward in collaboration with the Olkula traditional owners and a dedicated team of 15 volunteers, 12 of whom became engaged in the project, first as students. We worked together to achieve town planning approval established a pro bono partnership with Arup Engineering to certify the design and the structure, and we secured a large grant from the Queensland Government for the Growing Indigenous Tourism Queensland scheme to build a prototype, or effectively half, of the cultural centre. In particular, we're building a commercial kitchen, toilets and showers, and a large open deck area, the functions that relate to cultural tourism. We'll try and seek further funding later for the functions that relate to land management research and the cultural archive aspects. So this year we begin construction. In June, lockdowns pending, a group of master's students from our faculty will be helping the Olcala Rangers with construction, and we will continue to work together to create the building and co-author the research outcomes that come from our partnership. The Cultural Knowledge Centre partnership has also spurred further partnerships that extend beyond traditional building projects, but which still support the goal of building sustainable livelihoods on country. For instance, an interdisciplinary data science pathways project is exploring ways that emergent technologies and data science can support Indigenous land management practices and aspirations on both Olcala and neighbouring Lama Lama country. The project brings together Monash University's Sustainable Development Institute, Faculty of Civil and Chemical Engineering, and the Drone Discovery Platform. Similarly, the Getting Back on Country project is a collaboration between Olcala and the Universities of Melbourne's Faculties of Architecture, Building and Planning, Science and Global Population and Health to repatriate, document and display key cultural artefacts and cultural story places using virtual and augmented reality technologies. And all of these projects are derived from traditional owner needs and aspirations and have come out of our partnerships together. They also share the same 4 foundational principles. They are contextually responsive, emerging directly in response to traditional owner needs and aspirations. They involve the active participation of traditional owners through inclusive processes that recognise shared knowledge through co-authorship of all outputs. They are reliant on partnerships. This rests on a recognition that as someone trained in architecture and construction, we can't solve all problems and that buildings aren't always the most appropriate solutions, but that our ability to problem solve means we can see and form connections. The projects are also have an inbuilt flexibility to adapt to changing needs and respond to challenges as they arise. Finally, the key to this community-led approach is an emphasis on identifying and being united by a shared vision. Thank you.
Much, Hannah.